Today on Under the Big Tree, the audiobook production process. I love audiobooks. I listen to them in the car and while walking my dog Gracie. This habit probably doubles the number of books I ingest in a given year. And with apps like Libby, I can check them out of the public library and listen to them on my phone. The price is certainly right, and if it means that a book just isn't speaking to me, I can return it to the library and try another. If I can't check it out on Libby, then Audible can provide any audiobook I can think of in seconds. It's a good thing I like audiobooks, because I've spent a good deal of time creating them over the last few years. During that time, I've directed about 20 audiobooks, narrated a couple, and have really enjoyed the process. There is never a shortage of print books waiting to be converted to the audiobook format, meaning that it is another viable line of work to consider for the aspiring audio professional. In this episode, I'm going to explain my process for creating audiobooks, looking at the various phases and stages needed to complete these long and sometimes complicated projects. If you are interested in creating audiobooks, exploring audiobook production as a viable audio job, or just want to know how the sausage is made, then stick around. The pre-production phase. Let's say that you have a print book that you want to turn into an audiobook. There are quite a few ducks to get in a row before recording actually starts. The first is evaluating the manuscript's viability as an audiobook. Why is this print book being made into an audiobook? Has the print version already been released, or is the plan to release both formats day and date with each other? Who is the target market for this audiobook? Will enough people listen to it to justify the production costs and effort? And does it make a good audiobook? Not all print books translate well to the audio-only format. Are illustrations, captions, or footnotes critical to the understanding of the material? Is it a kid's picture book or an adult coffee table book? If so, it might not be a great candidate for an audiobook, or at least might require some editorial revision to shoehorn it into the audiobook format. This is where there is a significant difference between the print and audio formats. Print books are random access. You can skip around, read the caption under an illustration whenever you see fit, jump to the index or the glossary, back up to reread something a couple of chapters earlier, or look at a map or timeline in the book. Audiobooks are an inherently linear medium. Navigation is about moving forward through the text in real time. Skipping around without a visual reference to guide you can be clumsy and slow. Usually, the best you can do is select a chapter and skip forward or backwards 30 seconds at a time or so. Now, there may be financial or marketing considerations that can require the audiobook to be created anyway. But thinking about this point thoughtfully ahead of time might stave off problems later down the road. So let's say that the manuscript will work well as an audiobook, and that you have confirmed that you will be producing, directing, and/or narrating it. The next stage in pre-production is the research phase. This involves getting to know the book inside and out before you start recording, so the sessions can run as smoothly as possible. The first thing to do is, read the book cover to cover. As you read it, you make a few lists. The first list is words for the pronunciation guide. The second is a character guide. And the third is other notable details, such as whether the book is being told from multiple vantage points. I'll get into each of these topics. Pronunciation guide. So, it turns out that pronouncing words correctly in an audiobook tends to be a useful endeavor. Having to stop a session in order to look up how to pronounce a word over and over again just grinds a recording session to a halt. So an important part of pre-production is creating the pronunciation guide, which is just a list of words and how to pronounce them. The pronunciation can be done phonetically, with an audio recording of the word being spoken properly, or both. Depending on the project, the pronunciation guide can be created by the narrator, the director, the print editor, or someone else connected to the project. The author is usually brought in to consult, especially on words that they made up. Simple books might not need a production guide at all, while in one case, I did a large nonfiction science book that had over 500 terms. In most cases, the majority of the words are proper nouns, like names and locations, or scientific terms, like the Latin names of animals. However, authors of science fiction or fantasy often create elaborate worlds with large numbers of things that don't exist in our world, and even languages, such as the Elvish language created for Lord of the Rings. To create a pronunciation guide, you make a list of words that will require pronunciation as you read the book. Then there is a research phase, where you find the pronunciations from various sources on the internet, such as the Merriam-Webster Dictionary, Youglish, Forvo, and YouTube. Then, as mentioned, the author can help fill in the blanks for the words you can't find. When looking for the last names of living people, I like to go to YouTube and see if there are any lectures or interviews in which they introduce themselves. Youglish is also a good resource for many proper nouns, but sometimes it can be quite a scavenger hunt, and sometimes you just have to make an educated guess. Character list. When reading a fiction book, the narrator must emphasize the difference between characters to help the listener follow the story. Actors in films or stage plays only have to inhabit one character at a time. Audiobook narrators, however, have to jump in between characters at will, being both sides of a conversation. Moreover, narrators have to portray characters that are not of their gender, adding additional challenges. In order to help the narrator keep the characters straight, we create a character list as we read through the book. The names of each character are listed, as well as any pertinent aspects of their character, any accent, and any other hooks that the narrator can use to help portray them. It's really important to capture a bit of each character's vocal styling and performance in a separate audio file that can be easily accessed. This will allow the narrator to reference what they did earlier in the book, so the character's accent and vocal timbre don't drift over time. Those audio files become even more important when sequels of given books are recorded. The same narrator is often used for all books in a series, and having character reference from earlier books is extremely important to maintain consistency. Finally, there are books that are retellings of films or TV shows. In many of these cases, the narrator is, to a greater or lesser extent, imitating the performance given by the actor in the original work. While it is nice for the narrator to sound like the original actor, there is a slippery slope here. In my opinion, if the narrator can imitate the original actor really well to flawlessly, then it makes sense to have the narrator perform that way. If they can't, though, which is usually the case, then I ask the narrator to inhabit the spirit of that character instead. Try to find the essence of why that character is who they are. If the original actor has an accent the narrator can't pull off, then don't worry about it. If the character in the story is not the same gender as the narrator, don't try to fake it. Just find the essence of who the character is and what drives them, and work from there. Casting. The last major pre-production task is figuring out who is going to be reading the book in the first place. The casting process is so important because the listener is going to be hearing the voice and interpretation that the narrator is going to give to the book. Outside of the words themselves, this is probably the most important decision that the director can make. There are a number of decisions to be made that can winnow down the choices of narrators, and that should be where we start. Those choices include male versus female, union versus non-union, general age range, ethnicity, cultural resonance, availability, accuracy, cost, and personality. That sounds like quite a list, and it is. But these really are the factors that need to be taken into account to find the right narrator for the book. But before any of that comes the acting. Successful audiobook narration requires good acting ability, both in terms of vocal ability and interpretation of the text. While a good audiobook narrator is a good actor, not all good actors make successful audiobook narrators. The recording process is all about speed and accuracy, and actors that are good at memorizing lines for performance may not be as successful at chewing through page after page of text. Think about listening to The Lord of the Rings, The Brothers Karamazov, or Ulysses without hearing any mistakes. The creation of those audiobooks take a sustained and serious amount of effort. A slow narrator could make a challenging job almost impossible. A situation that comes up from time to time is a desire for the author to narrate their own audiobook. As just mentioned, there is a whole skill set that the author may or may not have. I like to think of it as when the pitcher has to bat in Major League Baseball. They're a great athlete, but their training and skill set are not the same as the other players on the team. There are certainly some pitchers that are successful hitters, though. Similarly, the author may also be an actor, or they may be a teacher or expert used to lecturing widely on their topic. In those cases, they may have the requisite abilities to do a good or even great job narrating their book. They are certainly the best subject matter expert for their book, which makes pre-production tasks like pronunciation guides much easier. And there is the notion of authenticity versus technical excellence. If I were to listen to an audiobook version of Cosmos, I wouldn't want it to be narrated by anyone but Carl Sagan. To that end, I think the best candidates for author-read audiobooks are autobiographies and nonfiction works. This avoids the necessity of performing a number of different characters and really plays to the strength of the author's deep understanding of the material. So for the purposes of this discussion, let's assume that the author is not reading the book. Now, let's go back to that long list of characteristics to find the right narrator. Let's start with male versus female voices. There is no definitive answer here, but you can start by looking at the protagonist of the book. If the main character is a teenage girl and many of the other characters are her friends, then a female narrator would be the obvious choice. If the book is a story about a group of soldiers in World War II, then a male narrator might have the edge. It's important to understand that the same audiobook will of course have both male and female characters, and the narrator will perform both of them. So this choice is more about the general tone than anything else. To that end, men usually play women by lightening up their voice and pitching it a bit higher, not by doing some Monty Python high falsetto. And women play men by darkening their voice a shade and dropping it a bit more into their chest. The goal here is to just give an impression, not fight against the biology of your vocal apparatus. The question of hiring a union versus non-union narrator is often a business decision based on the circumstances of the publisher and is thus generally out of the scope of this discussion. But there are a couple of points to mention. First, the majority of the full-time audiobook narrators in the United States are union members and need to be contracted as such. Same with any well-known performers. You will have a large pool of excellent talent to choose from when going union, but they also could be more expensive and may not have the availability to work within your schedule. Having said that, there are plenty of non-union narrators that could be the right choice for your book. There are any number of reasons why an actor or narrator has not joined a union, and that does not take away from their talent or potential to deliver you a great read. They will be less expensive and easier to hire, plus you will be able to repurpose your content for another platform in the future without having to pay reuse fees. So let's talk for a sec about age range, ethnicity, LGBT status, cultural resonance, and other defining characteristics. This can be a very sensitive and loaded topic, and I am in no way casting judgment or trying to get involved in a controversial discussion. I am only talking about these decision factors in terms of the narrator's affinity to the material, and whether the audiobook thus sounds and feels authentic to the listener. The days of John Wayne playing Genghis Khan are far behind us. Finding a narrator that has an authentic voice that pays respect to the material being narrated is really important. There is so much flavor and context that comes from the narrator's tonal characteristics, regional accent, and performance choices. Even something as simple as using the contraction "it's," less formal, instead of "it is," more formal, can give the listener insights into the story being told. Finding a narrator that is simpatico with the setting, characters, and overall tone of the story enhances the authenticity of the presentation. And if it gives people from underrepresented groups the ability to work in this field, so much the better. Another ineffable characteristic is the personality of the narrator. Matching up someone's persona with the mood of the text can really make or break a performance. Is the narrator formal? Informal? Do they exude gravitas and weight? Are they funny and lighthearted? Snarky or sarcastic? Subdued or insightful? Boiling with anger just beneath the surface? Welcoming and open? You can see how these tendencies can help the right narrator bring even more depth to the part. I was once working on a nonfiction book that had some pretty dark content. Rather than going with someone who sounded like a vampire, we went with a narrator with a comedic flair who added just the right amount of snark to lighten the material without going overboard in making it sound silly or unimportant. That critical creative decision really made the audiobook a compelling and engaging listen. Lastly, really good audiobook narrators are always in demand. They are often booked out months in advance, and their fee per finished hour of audio will be significantly higher than someone just starting out. Also, many narrators have a high-quality home recording rig with a vocal booth and nice microphone, but many prefer to work in studios instead. Recording studios charge on a per-hour basis, and on a long project like an audiobook, these costs can escalate quickly. Every audiobook project has a budget and schedule, and those practical considerations can often keep you from being able to hire your first choice. The good news is that there are a lot of great narrators out there, so being flexible in your casting choice is a necessary part of the process. The evolution of the process. The pandemic forced all of us to evolve in some ways. In the case of voice actors, that evolution came in the form of creating home studios in which they could ply their trade. Some voice actors also love gear and recording details, but others just want to act. Regardless, recording studios were shut down, and working voice actors set up some sort of recording system at home. Many systems were quite modest, using a closet with packing blankets on the walls as a vocal booth, perhaps a Rode large diaphragm condenser into a Focusrite Scarlett audio interface, then into a laptop running the freeware Audacity recording software. Others were far more elaborate, with dedicated, purpose-built vocal booths, high-end Neumann microphones, high-quality mic preamps and audio interfaces, and a remote computer running Pro Tools, controlled by a keyboard and monitor within the booth. Some voice actors hit record on the system and go act, leaving it to the editor after the fact to sift through the large quantities of material recorded. Others can stay in their acting zone while being able to punch in to record over mistakes as they go, leaving a much easier cleanup job for the editor. And again, other voice actors simply dispense with all the recording details by simply going into a recording studio. Those efforts were curtailed during the heaviest part of the pandemic, but studios are open now and recording dialogue every day of the week. If you choose a narrator who has their own recording system at home, you will save substantially on production costs by not paying studio fees. But the sound quality may not be as good, and you may end up doing a lot more editing after the fact. I've worked with several voice actors who have great home recording rigs and excellent recording chops, but I always consider that to be a nice to have when available. But the ability for a narrator to self-record can many times be the deciding factor in deciding who to hire for a project. If two actors are of similar skill and both have a suitable voice for the project, then the ability for one to be able to record themselves gives a distinct advantage over the other. So our pre-production process is almost over. You have selected the narrator, have the final proofed version of the manuscript along with a pronunciation guide and character sheet. The last step is to schedule the recording sessions, either with the talent's agent or with them directly. Be sure to book enough time to do the project. An audiobook can take between 3 and 6 sessions or more, depending upon the word count. I generally like to book 4-hour sessions, but will go to 6 hours at a time if there is a serious time crunch. Anything beyond that can tire out the talent and myself, making it hard to focus with the rapt attention necessary to get the best performance and minimize mistakes. The production phase. The book is ready, the talent is ready, the recording space is set up and ready to go. All the preparations have paid off, and now it is time to go into production. The first production question to ask is how many people will be in the recording sessions. This number is typically 1 to 4, depending upon how the various tasks are parceled out. In the case of one person, the narrator wears all the hats. They are recording themselves, interpreting the text, checking carefully to minimize mistakes, and sometimes even editing the audio after the record. This can give the narrator a lot of freedom because they can record whenever their schedule permits, not having to coordinate with anyone else. I think this tends to work best for manuscripts that don't require a lot of directorial interpretation, such as textbooks, product manuals, business documents, and so forth. For the experienced and energetic voice actor, this can be a good way to squeeze in some extra work after hours. I like having a bare minimum team of 2 people. This will be the narrator and either a recording engineer or a voice director. If it is an engineer, they are responsible for getting the dialogue recorded properly, but they also follow along with the script, noting misreads and fixing them on the fly. If the second person is a voice director, then the talent is recording themselves and the director is giving them interpretive guidance and noting misreads. Personally, this is my favorite way to go. You have the efficiency of 2 people, often better performances, and less misreads and mistakes than if the talent was recording by themselves. The next role is that of script supervisor, who is a person that is just focused on misreads and pronunciation support, allowing the director to concentrate on the performance. Thus, a 4-person team would consist of the narrator, the recording engineer, the voice director, and the script supervisor. The larger the team, the higher the cost. In a larger team, in order to keep the session running efficiently, the engineer usually only speaks when there is a technical problem or to confirm recording or stopping. The script supervisor only stops the session for misreads or pronunciation help, leaving the creative discussions between the narrator and voice director. Preparation, the key to success. Let's talk a bit more about preparation. Recording audiobooks is all about flow. They can range in length from a few thousand words to 100,000 words or more. When the talent is in the booth, you want to record as many words in a session as you can while maintaining quality, accuracy, and performance. I have been able to record more than 25,000 words in a day on occasion, though somewhere between 15 and 20,000 is more the norm. That requires sustained focus and concentration on the part of the narrator, director, engineer, and additional members of the team. The narrator is an actor who is constantly shading the text with meaning and often juggling multiple character voices while reading the text accurately. The director, engineer, or script supervisor follows the text scrupulously, stopping the recording if there is a misread or a note about performance. I have worked on incredibly smooth running sessions and have sessions where we needed multiple takes for each line. The latter scenario is stressful for all involved and requires a great deal of editing after the fact to turn it into a smooth presentation. In my opinion, the key factor is preparation. The director absolutely has to have done the pre-production to know how to support the narrator and keep the session moving. There are some narrators that can read text cold, and that is an amazing superpower. But most of the time, the narrator has read and prepared the text ahead of time. I have run into problems where the narrator has not prepared sufficiently and are trying to read the text cold without being particularly strong in that skill. At that point, the director needs to be the calm hand at the wheel, keeping everything as low-key and supportive as possible. Let the talent know that we are there as a team, that there is no rush, and that they're doing a great job. Any feedback can come at some other time, after the session. And in fact, it's been my experience that if someone comes in unprepared and has a rough time of it, the director doesn't need to say a word. The narrator knows all too well what happened. With preparation, skill, and experience, the best audiobook narrators can often read several pages at a stretch without making a mistake. But everyone misses words, adds words, or stumbles at some point. And each time you stop, you have to reestablish the flow. The longer the pause in recording, the more mental effort on the part of the narrator to get back into the groove. And so, it is critical to be as prepared as possible ahead of time to always keep things moving forward. My personal approach works like this. If the talent makes some flub, I will thumb the talkback mic and say something like, "Sorry, Joe, but I believe that word is pronounced wizened, not wizened. Can we take it from the top of the sentence?" The engineer will prepare to punch in at the spot I specified, then gives the talent 5 seconds of pre-roll or so to match the previous performance. They pick up at the top of the sentence that contained the mistake and keep moving forward smoothly. The total time for stopping, noting the error, picking up, and being on our way again is less than a minute. Audiobook narration requires focus and concentration the whole time you are recording. To that end, taking regular breaks to stretch, have a bio break, get some water, and rest your eyes is really important. No one is working as hard as the narrator, and thus the break schedule always revolves around them. Every hour or hour and a half, when I can feel them getting tired, frustrated, or losing focus, I ask if they want a break. If they say yes, we immediately stop and take 10 minutes. Lunch breaks are usually 45 minutes to an hour. No one wants to break for very long because it is harder to get back into the flow of the book the longer you are away from it. And if the narrator is on a roll, no one else can leave the session. So use those breaks wisely and plan ahead. Session count. Let's talk for a moment about the number of sessions you should plan. A good rule of thumb is a finished hour of narrated audio is about 9,000 words. So, if you have a 75,000 word book, the runtime will be about 75,000 divided by 9,000, or 8.5 hours or so. Every narrator is different. Some make mistakes every paragraph, and some can go several pages without a misread. So, I like to plan for the recording time to be 2 to 3 times the final runtime of the book. So, in our example above, I would schedule between 17 and 25 recording hours for the book, with it typically landing closer to the 17 than the 25. These numbers are pretty conservative, but it is better to plan ahead and not need the time rather than get in a crunch and not have enough time scheduled to finish the book. When you are on a roll, you can really tear through a lot of pages in a short period of time. But that doesn't always happen, so it is good to be prepared for a worst-case scenario. Room tone. At the beginning of every workday, it's important to record 30 seconds of room tone. This is literally just the sound of the room with nothing happening in it. It's usually best to ask the talent to leave the booth while you are recording, but some prefer to just sit there being as quiet as possible. Room tone will come in very handy when you get into the dialogue editing phase. At the end of the recording day, the talent or recording studio will usually send the day's work to the production team so they can begin editing as the book is being recorded. I know of one audiobook producer whose editors are halfway around the world, so the end of the recording day is the beginning of the editor's workday. That kind of efficiency, organization, and planning is the best way to make audiobooks quickly. Intro and outro credits. Intro and outro credits are very important and should be read by the narrator. They are very short and can include a short music stinger to help set the mood for the book. A typical intro might be The 12 Yellow Dinosaurs, written by Susan Author, read by Joe Narrator. The outro is a bit longer as it includes the copyright information. It's important to get the copyright ownership straight with the publishing company. Typically, the text itself is owned by the author, while the audiobook production is owned by the audiobook publisher. There are always exceptions, so be sure to get the credits right before you record. Here's a pro tip. If you don't have the credits squared away before you start recording, you can always record them at the pickup session during the post-production phase. Pro tip number 2, take a look at the credits page at the beginning of the manuscript. The audiobook outro credits will often be the same. So with that said, the outro credits will read something like, You have been listening to The 12 Yellow Dinosaurs, written by Susan Author, narrated by Joe Narrator. Text copyright 2022 Susan Author, production copyright 2022 Acme Audiobook Publishing Company. Thank you for listening. Post-production. Okay, so you've recorded the whole book and the intro-outro credits, so you're done, right? Nope, not yet. You have now entered the post-production phase of your audiobook production. The next step is to edit the dialogue. This topic could easily take up a whole video in itself, but we can hit the highlights here. Dialogue editing for audiobooks is similar to dialogue editing for films, games, or TV. You are putting the raw recordings into a coherent whole, where hundreds of separate recordings connect together seamlessly. Any awkward pauses and mouth noises are removed, passing airplanes or trucks are minimized, breaths that are cut off due to punch-ins are smoothed over or replaced. Editing audiobook dialogue is a marathon, and you can't get too caught up in minutia or you will never finish. You can edit in whatever digital audio workstation you are fastest in. Most people use Pro Tools, but I use Reaper and love it. I prefer its workflow, configurability, and speed. The dialogue editor has two secret weapons at their disposal to make edits smooth as silk: Room Tone and Isotope RX. Remember when I said to record 30 seconds of room tone at the beginning of each day's work? Here is where it comes in handy. It's subtle, but nothing sounds weirder than to have a narration all of a sudden cut to absolutely no sound. If you are editing and need to add a bit of spacing because a couple of lines are too close together, or if you cut out a bit of background noise, or there is an edited bit of breathing that sounds clipped off, you might have an unnatural moment of absolute dead silence. Grabbing a bit of that room tone and editing it in over that gap in the regions fixes the problem. The subtle sound is always there, though we never notice. But without it, those dead silent moments are subtly jarring. The other tool that is an absolute must-have is the Isotope RX noise reduction suite of plugins. There are separate plugins for nearly any dialogue problem you might come across. You can lower the overall noise level, or get rid of steady-state sounds like air conditioning fans or electrical hum. You can declip overmodulated moments, such as when a narrator gets a bit too loud and overloads the mic preamp. You can use the spectral editor to remove certain bands of frequency, such as the rumble of a truck driving by. There is even a declicking plugin, which is incredibly useful for removing clicks and snaps from a narrator with a sticky mouth. Pro tip, try to make sure there are some Granny Smith apples around for the narrator. If you hear a lot of little clicks and snaps coming from their mouth as they record, ask them to eat a bit of apple. There is something about that gets the saliva moving, which gets rid of mouth noise. Who knew? In order to make the files manageable, you will usually want a separate file for each chapter of the book, plus one for the intro, dedication, and foreword, and one for the outro. It makes it much easier to wrangle and find problems and mistakes in the recordings that way. So the final delivery of an audiobook is not a single audio file, but a folder of them. So you've finished the dialogue edit, and you have a nice folder full of audio files organized by chapter. The next step is quality control. You have to compare the audio recording to the manuscript, finding any misreads, editing mistakes, mispronunciations, or missing or extra pieces of text. The hard way to do this is to listen to the files one by one while noting the problems in a spreadsheet. You list the problem text, what the problem is, such as missing word or misread, and the time where it occurs. When I've done books this way, I've listened to them at 1.5 times playback speed to get them done more quickly. You have to do QC, but it is a tedious process that requires a lot of focus, just like the recording process itself. Fortunately, there is a technological solution that greatly cuts down on the drudgery of audiobook quality control. It is a piece of software called Positron that is specifically designed to help make audiobook production easier, and it clearly works because the majority of audiobook producers I know use it on every book. Positron's primary function is the post-production QC check. To check a book, you start by uploading the manuscript into the system. Then you upload the audio files. Positron then goes through the entire book, syncing up the manuscript to the audio files, and then checking for any places where the dialogue does not match up with the printed text. It flags them, and then you manually go through the list of issues, listening to the narration while viewing the supposed error. You then make a decision as to whether the error is something that should be re-recorded at the pickup session, such as a missing word or phrase, or whether it's not a big enough problem to worry about. In that case, you just mark it as ignore and move on to the next error. Examples of things I might ignore are contractions, such as if the text says it is, but the narrator says it's, assuming that the less formal contraction fits well with the tone of the book. And every narrator has their own timbre, their own cadence, their own dialect. Some people have very crisp diction, while others blend their words together more. Positron sometimes has trouble with blurry or mushy pronunciation, but overall, it saves a ton of time and headache. A book that used to take me a couple of days to proof takes just a few hours with Positron. Once you have finished proofing the audiobook, Positron spits out a detailed pickup list that you then use to re-record the errors. That's the post-production side of Positron, but it also has a pre-production side that I use all the time. When you import the manuscript, before you have started recording, you can use Positron to help create your pronunciation guide. You can adjust what type of words it might flag, from just wholly made-up words to any capitalized proper nouns. It dutifully spits out a list of such words, and you go through the list, selecting which ones you want to get pronunciations for and which ones to ignore. Positron puts in its own pronunciation in text and audio for any words it can find in the online dictionaries. For the rest, it is up to you. You can find word pronunciations in such websites as Youglish and Forvo, but I also use YouTube a lot. But if it is a wholly made-up word, like names of people and locations in science fiction and fantasy novels, you need to ask the author. Nothing is worse than recording an entire book only to find out that you have mispronounced the name of the main character. So getting that feedback from the author before you start can save a lot of headaches and heartaches later on down the road. As you get your pronunciations from whatever source, you attach them in Positron to the word in question. You can type in a pronunciation, or you can hit the microphone button and record yourself pronouncing it correctly. I generally like to do that when possible, because I have found that written pronunciations can sometimes be ambiguous. Best is to have both written and recorded versions. Anyway, once you have created your pronunciation guide, you can export it as a spreadsheet and send it to the narrator. But it also has a link to allow you to just view the guide online. That's how I usually do it, having Pronunciation Guide open in a browser window next to the manuscript. Positron also has a character reference section. It will go through the book, finding names that it thinks are characters. Again, you choose which ones you want to keep. Then you can add text descriptions to those characters as well as audio character references. Those references are worth their weight in gold, allowing the narrator to use the same voice for the character they did the day before, or, in the case of sequels, the same voice they used in the previous book. Positron has a bunch of other niceties, and they are constantly improving their product, listening to the feedback of their users. All in all, an excellent product, and if you're producing audiobooks, you should probably be using it. The pickup session. When you have the pickup list of wrong or missing dialogue from the recording, you schedule a pickup session with the talent. I usually schedule a 2-hour session to be sure, but in reality, we often do it in half an hour or less. You go back to whatever recording environment you did the primary recording in for continuity. Then you have the talent listen to the line they are replacing so that they can duplicate the feel and have them re-recorded. When you're done, the dialogue editor takes the pickups and replaces the problem lines with the new ones. Now that the audiobook is complete, it is time for the mastering phase. Mastering dialogue. Mastering dialogue refers to making final tweaks to the edited, complete dialogue to prepare it for distribution. When mastering dialogue for audiobooks, you have to ask yourself a simple question. How will the listener listen to your masterpiece? For the most part, people listen in their car while driving or while taking public transit. And I often listen through my phone while I'm walking my dog. So there is often a lot of background noise in the listening environment. Furthermore, audiobooks are usually delivered as MP3 files, and often with fairly low bandwidth settings. So we're not talking about a delicate symphony here. The goal of mastering audiobooks is to make the dialogue intelligible under less than ideal listening conditions. For those of you that are not audio professionals, I'm about to discuss techniques using audio jargon, but it'll only be for 30 seconds or so. Please bear with me. To start the mastering process, I'll typically remove frequencies that don't matter in this context. I'll use both a high-pass filter and a low-pass filter, dialing out the frequencies outside of the range of speech. Then I'll listen to the timbre of the narrator's voice to see if there are any frequency areas that can use a little boost or cut to bring the best sound forward. This is very subtle, and a little goes a long way. Then I apply a compressor to even out the dynamics. This is important because very quiet passages could be made inaudible by the listener's car's background noise as they drive. You can use either single-band or multi-band compression, depending upon your taste and the narrator's sound. Sometimes you then need to apply a de-esser to bring down the splashy, sibilant S's and F's. Be careful though, you don't want to overdo it and make it sound like the narrator is lisping. Then, at the end of the chain, I apply a mastering limiter. This will get your overall recording to the proper level for production. That level is different depending upon the final platform, but minus 18 LUFS with a true peak of minus 1 dBFS is a pretty common standard. With that all set, you can bounce out your files, and you are finally done. Well, almost. The audiobook needs to have an icon created, which is usually a square version of the print cover. Then there is metadata that needs to be embedded, copy to be adapted for the description, and short excerpts to be used for marketing purposes. All of that material then gets delivered to the distribution platform, and away the audiobook goes into the world. Hooray! Give yourself a big pat on the back. Let's see, is there anything else? Oh yes, the talent and everyone that worked on the project needs to be paid. So make sure that gets handled in a timely fashion, especially if you ever want to work with them again. Now you can sit back, relax, and be truly proud of the monumental effort that you and your team put into making this audiobook a reality. This has been a very long episode, but there was a lot of ground to cover. If you are still here with me, then I thank you for sticking it out and wish you the very best in your audiobook production career. I've worked on an awful lot of different types of projects in my career, from film to video games to TV to interactive media. And I have to say, I love working on audiobooks just as much as I have working in those other formats. I hope you may feel the same way. So that's it for this episode of Under the Big Tree. If you liked it, please feel free to like, share, and subscribe. And for now, this is Nick, signing off. May you and yours be safe and well.